Thanks to our readers this morning for helping with the gospel. When I was growing up, a lot of times in the summertime, I got farmed out to cousins who lived on the farm. I'm sure they were really thrilled to have this city kid on the farm. I was thrilled until I was driving the tractor with a manure spreader with the wind going the wrong way. But they thought it was funny. But anyway, one of the things that happened one summer was my aunt and uncle took me into the big town of Alta Vista. We went to visit two spinster sisters who were blind. And it's a good thing they were blind, because when I went into their house, I'm sure all I was doing was going. There was nothing on the walls. There was nothing setting around. It was the cleanest place I'd ever been in. And we had a meal there. And I kept thinking, how did they do this? And I even noticed that their stove didn't have any markings on it. I didn't know you could order a blind stove. Well, this being born blind, this physical blindness that today's gospel is kind of fashioned around, really has nothing to do in a lot of ways, because as you listen to the gospel today, you realize they were talking about a spiritual blindness, an inner blindness. And so it's a difference, but it gives us pause to take a look at the blindness in our own lives. Now, last Monday I went to the optometrist. I hadn't been for about 4 years, and so I've been noticing that the altar's getting farther away. And those things happen little by little. And so you go to the optometrist, and he swings that thing in front of your eyes and flicks all those things. I always think my eyelashes are going to get caught in those little here, A, B, up, down, 1, 2. And so he goes through that, but one of the things that happens with our vision is that slowly but surely things get a little blurry. It doesn't happen all at once. Little by little our vision gets cloudy, we don't see as well as we used to, and we need a corrective for that. But what happens when it comes to our spiritual blindness? What happens when it comes to the vision that happens in our spiritual lives? The same thing happens. Little by little, we don't see quite as well. Little by little, we don't really recognize things. Little by little, we lose our vision. We lose our way. Except, it's easy when you go to the optometrist, because he can check that. But how do we do that in our spiritual lives? As I've said to you many times before, we're either slowly, imperceptibly getting better, or slowly, imperceptibly going backwards, but we never stay the same. We never dog paddle. And so how do we know when we need to get our vision corrected? Well, for us as Catholic Christians, we have the perfect prescription. And that perfect prescription is the sacrament of reconciliation. And so it's a time for us to, how do we prepare for it? We call it examining our conscience. And so we take some time and we take a look at, an inner look at, what's going on in our lives. We ask ourselves some questions, and that helps us to see if we've kind of deviated from the path. Those 10 commandments are only, though, just the starting point. I mean, for most of us, we whip through the top 10 and we go, okay, I haven't murdered anybody yet this week. My neighbor moves, so I don't have to worry about committing adultery. So we kind of run through the top 10 and we kind of think, well, I don't have any sins. In fact, a lot of times people will come in the confessional and they'll sit down and say, well, Father, really, I'm not too bad. That has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with it. Of course you're not too bad. But we do bad things. And so it's getting honest with ourselves and taking a look at that so that God can correct it. Or if you align it with the second reading that we had today, we bring those things out into the light of day so that they can be healed. Now, the interesting thing about that, though, is that as in Catholicism, there's been a decline in people receiving the sacrament of reconciliation. People used to never go to communion before they had gone to confession. And so as there's a decline in that, guess where there's a rise in it? In the therapeutic world. So if you talk to people who do counseling, particularly people who are in a 12-step program, they'll tell you that one of the most powerful places where healing happens is when you have a searingly honest confession. You verbalize the things that you've done, the faults that you've had. And once that happens, that healing can really start to have in your life. The thing of it is that even from a psychological standpoint of view, you can't just think you're sorry. That doesn't settle it. You can be as sorry as you want, but if it stays here, it just stays here. There's something about the catharsis of saying those things out loud, first of all for the person themselves to hear it, but also to have somebody else receive that and validate that, and in the confession situation, to take a look at that in terms of you are sharing those things with the person who not only represents the community, because no sin is private, but also somebody who represents Christ. And so if you talk to somebody who is in AA or in any of the 12-step programs, they'll tell you that one of the most powerful things they will ever do is the fifth step. And the fifth step is that time when you do this soul-searching expression of all the wrongs that you've done. So for Catholics who are in a 12-step program, they simply go to confession. And I have had several opportunities to celebrate a fifth step with somebody who's in the program, and they are amazing. They're amazing situations. And there's nothing like walking away from the sacrament of reconciliation with all kinds of crap that you have carried around for years and leaving it there. Because it's done. So if it's such a great sacrament, what's the problem? Why don't we do it? Well, I think the first one is the fact we say, well, really, I'm not so bad. So we compare ourselves to our neighbors or our mother-in-law or the guy that we work for, and you go, well, at least I'm not like her. Well, God doesn't grade on a bell curve. So and on the time of our judgment, we're not going to line up and say, well, let me see, you're not as bad as Burley down there. I don't know about that, but, we come down here. I don't know about Harry Wolfenkohl over here. All those times in church with you, I don't know. No, it's not on the curve. Each one of us appear before God, and we're honest. But a couple of things get in the way. The first one is this. People will say, well, I just can't tell somebody else about this. I just can't tell somebody else about this. Because I can't forgive myself. Do you realize that when you say that you can't forgive yourself, that you make yourself better than God? So now you've already committed a sin. You say, I just can't forgive myself. God always forgives us. It's a promise. It's a promise. So when we say, well, I can't forgive myself, I can't tell somebody else. Well, second part of that is that you're not going to shock the person on the other side of the screen. You only have to be a priest for about 13 days, and you've heard it all, I never go, well, for God's sakes, I've never heard that one, It's not going to happen. Because you know what? It's not the point. The biggest mistake that people make about reconciliation is they think confession is about themselves. It's not about you at all. It's about God. It's about God. It's about God's lavish love. It has nothing to do with you. You're just bringing the material to work with, but it's about God. The second thing is it's not about you, it's not about the priest. There's a great grace that happens at ordination. We just don't remember stuff. People come in sometimes and say, you remember what I told you about when I was in here the last time? And I say, well, really, I don't. If you need to remind me, do so, but I don't remember that, okay? Because it's about what God's going to work in our lives. Now, this Wednesday, we have a tremendous opportunity for that as we celebrate reconciliation, our Lenten reconciliation at Starmont High School. And I think we have it set up in a really great way. There'll be a meal from 5:30 to 7:30 in the school cafeteria. Confessions are from 6 to 8. In Advent this last year, we had 6 priests. We heard for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and we had well over 300 people there. More confessions than all 5 parishes in the first 3 years I was here. This time we have 10 priests. One-stop shopping. The only thing I can't bring is what you bring with you. Okay? But the psychological world, the therapeutic world, tells us how significant it is for us to unload. And, of course, none of us are that bad. Not the point. None of us are sinless. And when you leave today, every person here will be given a little sheet, an examination of conscience sheet. And if you can read through those questions in a self-reflective way and not have anything to go to confession about, call me and I'll take you out to dinner. One other point. The nice thing about having a lot of other confessors on Wednesday is the fact that you don't have to go to me. But let me tell you, I will only go to somebody who knows me well. So my confessor at the monastery, Father Xavier, knows me very well. And I do that because he knows me well enough to say, you know better than that. So I don't like to, you can do this, nothing wrong if you do, but I don't like to slide through and say, well, I'm kind of mad at my parishioner, so I kind of lost my temper a little bit. I want somebody to say, come on, John, what's going on? And so it needs to be age appropriate. So we've got examination of conscience sheets for the kids. I remember going to a first reconciliation service in the parish one time, and this little girl was standing up on a box at the pulpit and the microphone, and she's doing the examination of conscience. And this was first reconciliation. Jody, pay attention to this. And she said, for the times that I am self-righteous. So I went up to the DRE afterwards, and I said, how many second graders do you know are self-righteous? I said, where did you get that? She said, well, it was in a book. I said, get a different book. 2 weeks later, I was at a communal penance at Advent in a parish, and a woman was in the pulpit doing that, and she said, for the times that were not very nice. Give me a break. What do you mean, not very nice? You're cussing at somebody under your breath? That's a little more honest. When you say, go to hell to somebody, okay? Searingly honest. God knows, admit it. Confession is about being honest with God, period. It's not going to work on the final day when you say to God, well, you know. We need to say it. Receive that absolution. Doesn't make any difference how long it's been since you went. There is no wrong way to go to confession. There is no bad confession except one that's not made. So I strongly encourage you, I exhort you before Easter to make sure that you celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation. It is the greatest gift next to the Eucharist that God gives us. And so if there's something that's been burdening you or troubling you, or maybe your life is just kind of spiritually gray right now, okay? What will jumpstart that, what will help that, is making a good confession. We all have blind spots. We need to pull off, examine our conscience, and bring those things into the light of day. The last words of today's gospel are very instructive. The Pharisee said, you're not calling us blind, are you? And Jesus says, if you were blind, there would be no sin in that. But we see, you say, and your sin remains.